Hi, today I'm talking about how we decide at what level we might want to regulate an environmental issue that we have going on. So we can think about environmental issues at the local level. So your neighbor has a bunch of trash in the front yard. That's a very local thing, right? That's affecting you as the neighbor, maybe the neighborhood, maybe the town starts to get involved. But that's not typically something where it's going to be happening at the state level or the federal level or the international level. That's a local issue, a bunch of trash in a yard. Now there are other issues like global warming that are definitely international issues. It is caused by activity all around the world, and it's affecting people all around the world, affecting ecosystems all around the world. So we'll often want to craft responses based on the characteristics of the issue that we're trying to deal with. So how do we decide at what level? Should it be local, state, federal, or international? Well, the main thing we tend to look at is what kind of externalities are caused by this issue that are justifying intervention in the first place. So I mentioned the neighbor with trash in the yard. We can think about trash more generally, actually. That's usually a pretty local issue. So trash, if it's thrown around, obviously is not scenic. It is bad for wildlife. If trash isn't disposed of properly, it can contaminate groundwater or surface water. It can contaminate soil. But all of those things, generally speaking, happen in a fairly local area. So usually when we look at something like trash, which is often called municipal solid waste, that's something we'll usually want to deal with at a local level. And the main reason we want to do that is we want people to be able to internalize the externality that they're causing. So the spillovers that are happening to other people, especially the bad ones, the negative externalities, we want decision makers to be able to consider both their private gains and losses, but also the losses caused by negative externalities. And if those negative externalities are happening at a local level, we usually want to regulate at the local level because it allows us for people with much better information and more, you could almost say, skin in the game to be involved in saying what should be done. Another side benefit of having very local, decentralized sort of regulation of an environmental issue is it allows for a lot of variation. So some communities may prefer economic development over conserving nature when they're looking at that key trade-off that we've talked about. And some communities can do that. They can permit a disposal facility that is not as stringently controlled as people who live in a different community that really favor the environmental protection side of the balance. They're willing to give up some more money and economic development if it means they'll have a cleaner environment. We can have that sort of variation across communities in a way that better fits people's preferences in those communities. That also gives people choice if people are choosing what community to move to. So economists call that sorting. People will sort into a community that meets their preferences better. So they'll look at things like how clean a neighborhood is, but also what the property tax rates are and things like that. Another benefit of localized regulation is that we have laboratories of democracy. So if we have a lot of variation in policies across communities, we can look at that variation and try to figure out what seems to work well. When we're looking at the trade-off, okay, people will choose different places on that, but we can also learn about what is efficient, what's effectively getting us as much environmental protection we can with as low a cost as possible. So that's a benefit of local regulation. But if we start to think about things like polluting a river, so a town may be thinking about the river as it goes through town and factories that are using it both as a water source and as a source to put waste into, and they may be thinking about their own water sourcing for the municipal water, and they'll be thinking about their own public water treatment facility that may release its treated water back into the river. Those are all things that they would think about and internalize, but they won't be thinking so much about the next town that's downriver from them. And so, likewise, the city that's upstream from them isn't really considering this town, right? So we have negative externalities that go beyond the local level. If we're talking about something like a riverway, so often that would be regulated at the state level. So a state will consider the benefits and costs both to the local communities and to the other communities affected through these externalities. We might think of some river systems, say the Colorado River. It's not one state that's affected in a big way. It's actually Colorado, Arizona, Nevada, California. And so there we may think of regional responses. And so often we end up with water compacts or some sort of agreements among states where they agree to certain measures that allow them to factor in how these externalities are affecting not just within the state but also spilling across state borders. Now if we go up another level, actually water is largely regulated under the Clean Water Act, which is federal. And so that addresses this cross-state aspect of water pollution whenever a river or a lake is crossing a state line. But I said it's often regulated at the state level, partially through federal cooperatism. And that's when states are actually enforcing the federal laws. So that allows us to have federal standards, but the states can kind of choose what parameters they want when it comes to actually issuing permits, enforcing those permits. States can always set standards that are higher than the federal levels. The federal levels act as kind of a floor. I say always, I shouldn't speak in extremes, but usually states have that flexibility to be more stringent if they want. They just have to meet this federal floor, this threshold. Now there are some issues, as we said before, that go from one country to another, and it's hard to get international cooperation. There are no strong enforcement mechanisms under international law for things like pollution. The strongest things that we have are usually agreements that countries reach with each other, either bilateral or multilateral, that have some sort of enforcement mechanism, often tied to trade terms. But so issues like climate change, a lot of pollution within the ocean, in say Europe, a river system may cross many different countries. So again, we get a regional compact sort of arrangement. And very often the terms of these, to get strong enforcement, we need to build in some other aspects of the relationship among these countries to get there to be strong incentives, because the only way you can get a country to sign an agreement for pollution control is for them to want to do it. They're only going to sign it if it's in their interest in some way. And so often we see countries using leverage in other realms to try to get other countries to sign on board for an environmental agreement. And again, why might we want to regulate something like air pollution at an international level? Well, if we have externalities that are crossing borders in major ways, we really need international level response to it to be able to address those international externalities. So look at the externalities of an environmental issue, and that kind of tells you what the ideal level of response will be for that issue. That doesn't mean it's always easy to figure out how to resolve that issue, what the policy should be, and with things like international agreements, even coming up with an idea of what countries should do doesn't tell us how it will be effectively enforced, which is often a big question mark, but it gets us thinking about what level we might want to use to address something. All right, that's it for today. Thanks.